Spark Seekers. I'm Jenna Wilmers, your host of Ember Igniters podcast, and this is where we dive into finding your purpose, beating burnout, and uncovering what it really takes to relight your inner fire while juggling real life. And today I have an exciting guest. His name is Dr. Greg Chasson, and he is an expert in perfectionism. Welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
I am so excited about this podcast since we chatted a little bit before because I've often told the listeners that I'm a recovering perfectionist. And so when I stumbled upon your work, I was like, oh my gosh, this is me. And after we had chatted, you had sent me a link about your perfectionist quiz to see like how much you were. And I thought maybe like I was going to be one of those people that like skyrocketed off the charts and everything.
hmm
And I was really surprised because I didn't. So we'll get into that more later. I want to start with how did you get into this work?
I get that question a lot, and the bottom line is that it really comes from two different avenues. I don't think that you get into the world of perfectionism and write a whole entire book about it without experiencing some of it yourself. So when you say you're a recovering perfectionist, I would consider myself in that class as well. And the other avenue really comes from a professional angle where I stumbled into the world of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And obsessive compulsive disorder, I fell in love with it instantly, maybe because it resonated. But ultimately, is a very common presentation within people with obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, I want to be very clear. People with perfectionism don't always have OCD, and folks with OCD don't always have perfectionism. So if you think about a Venn diagram, there's quite a bit of overlap there, but it's not that every person presents with both. But because of the common occurrence where we would see perfectionism in people with OCD, I ended up dealing a lot with perfectionism when I was getting into the world of obsessive compulsive disorder and providing treatments and doing research with these folks. And ultimately, because of my own journey and the journey of my patients, I developed a very clear understanding of how perfectionism works based on my own clinical work, based on my own experience and journey, and based on the research and treatment development, and ultimately created a palatable approach to thinking about perfectionism. And about a year and a half, 2 years ago, my trainees, my doctoral students who I trained to provide treatments, when we were working around the concept of perfectionism, they stopped me and said, "Hey, Greg, you need to write this stuff down. It's really good." And the patients really take to it. And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And so that's sort of where I am today. And the book got written pretty quickly and pushed out there. And I think it's really connected with a lot of people who didn't realize the scope of their own perfectionism, but also just in general, how wide perfectionism goes in terms of the concept.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people think they're intertwined to something else. So, like you mentioned, OCD. Some people might actually intertwine it a little bit with depression and anxiety.
100%. In fact, I'd say at the core of perfectionism is anxiety. And then if you're hitting your head against the wall repeatedly trying to get things perfect, and you're not showing any cognitive flexibility around that. So perfectionism really is defined by cognitive inflexibility and excessive standards. And so if you're pursuing excessive goals and you're not flexible enough to deviate when things are not going well, that's the very definition of perfectionism. And if you do that long enough, you become helpless, which is a really strong feeling of anxiety. You keep hitting your head against the wall, nothing's working, you don't know what to do next. And then at some point, with repeated failure and frustrations, it turns into hopelessness,
Mm,
which becomes, in a lot of ways, for a lot of people, becomes depressing. And
right.
so really you're right on target. And in a lot of ways, perfectionism is at the core of a lot of the anxiety and depression that we see out there.
Is perfectionism always bad though?
No, thank you for asking that, actually. That's a really important point, and I want to make it very clear. I do not want to vilify and rag on people with perfectionism, especially since I'm recovering from that myself. I understand that can be a problem. Perfection, like this is not about ridding your worlds, your workplace, your families of people with perfectionism. They can be some of your strongest team members or
Mhm.
family members or friends. Perfectionists come with tremendously positive qualities, right? They are, the research shows they are going to have some of the highest conscientiousness of anybody you know. And
Wow.
I got to be honest with you, if I'm going to pick people around me, I want them to have high conscientiousness, thoughtfulness, right?
Yeah.
They also tend to be more honest than other people.
Really?
Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
there's a level of perfectionism where people worry about being a good person, and there's this moralism associated with it. So they tend to see higher levels of people worrying about being a moral or good person. And so, in that sense, lying can sometimes be problematic in that framework.
Hmm.
They also tend to be the most dedicated, hardworking people that you've ever met. They've been tripling down on everything since you've ever met them.
Wow.
And they're not going to be your most efficient workers, but they're going to be extremely hardworking and industrious. And loyal. I mean, they're going to be super loyal. And so these are some of the great qualities that you get with perfectionism. The problem is that it comes with a lot of problems that ultimately need to be managed. But if you can do so, you can leverage the good stuff and mitigate the bad stuff. You've got yourself some of the most amazing people on your team or in your family or whatever.
Wow, that's really cool. So, what are some other misconceptions about perfectionism then?
Perhaps the biggest misperception is that perfectionism is a good thing, that, people use it in a sort of half-assed kind of way about what's your greatest weakness when they're in a job interview and they're like, oh, I'm a perfectionist, as if that somehow suggests a positive rather than a negative. If you use that answer with me in an interview, you've gone down the wrong path because I don't take it so lightly. Now,
Yeah.
if you say you're a recovering perfectionist and you tell me what that means, then I probably will hire you, right? Because that takes a lot of strength and ability and insight. But the idea that perfectionism is a good thing really, I think, is a problem, and that people get very concerned about not being a perfectionist. Like, I don't want to get rid of this because that means I'm going to do shoddy work,
Yeah.
or I'm not going to be able to do the kinds of things that I want to do. And the bottom line is that perfectionism is not the same thing as high standards. And so getting rid of perfectionistic tendencies that are problematic actually improves your quality of work. It doesn't, by mitigating or working on your perfectionism, you're not sacrificing the quality of what you're doing.
Wow.
That is a huge misconception. People are like, oh, I don't want to get rid of this. And so they hold on to it like a bulldog with a bone.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you bring up the excellence versus perfectionism. Can you like define those so that people can understand the difference? Because I believe there's a difference, but I want to hear what your perspective is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question because it's often misunderstood. But high standards and excellence really comes with flexible thinking, as we talked about earlier. Inflexible thinking or cognitive rigidity is at the core of perfectionism, and then excessive expectations. So
Mhm.
I don't think I don't know that necessarily excessive expectations by itself is a problem. You see Michael Jordans of the world, and they had excessive expectations for themselves. But
Yeah.
when you combine that with cognitive rigidity, that is a huge problem because, like I said, you're pursuing goals that are probably not possible, and you are not giving yourself the flexibility to give yourself credit and to deviate from those goals. So, high expectations and excellence really stem from this cognitive flexibility and having goals that are actually reasonable, not necessarily low or even medium, but
Mhm.
reasonable. But most importantly, it comes with this cognitive flexibility. Can you roll with the punches when things don't go your way, right? If you have a sales number, but the economy tanks in the middle of your quarter,
Yeah,
are you able to shift and be flexible in that goal, knowing that the world around you is shifting as well?
sure. Are you seeing more of an issue with, I would say even the Gen Z, where they are always living focused on what do other people think of me? I got to do it this way because so and so is doing it this way, and the imposter syndrome. Are we seeing like an uptake in perfectionism?
Yeah, absolutely. Tom Curran does research on this in the United Kingdom, and he's done some research on long-term growth or evolution of perfectionism over the generations. And he's found an increase in perfectionism over time from cohort to cohort. And so this is not surprising. I think our society is putting more and more perfectionistic pressure on us, whether it's testing in schools or social media is a huge culprit of this, looking and sounding and coming across a certain way. And so, with all these pressures, I'm not surprised to see perfectionism increasing over time. And so, yeah, I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem as we sort of our society puts ourselves out there more and more.
Yeah.
And I think imposter syndrome is a great concept that you brought up because I think it's very well connected to perfectionism. I don't think they're always connected, but I do think that a lot of the times they are. And people with imposter syndrome often worry about making mistakes and might not put themselves out there, and then they engage in a ton of safety behaviors, right?
Mm.
So for those that don't know, imposter syndrome is the idea that someone doesn't feel like they belong or deserve to be where they are. They somehow pulled the wool over someone's eyes and got some sort of recommendation, some sort of accommodation or a position of some sort that wasn't fully deserved, and that they somehow fooled people and that they're going to get caught. That's an imposter syndrome in a nutshell, and it's often related to perfectionism because people often discount or don't see the own strength that they bring to a situation and that they might have actually been brought in under that title or for that position for a good reason.
Mm.
But in the case of imposter syndrome, we see a lot of times that people are perfectionistic about it. They get rigid about their performance. They don't think they deserve it. And then they engage in a ton of safety behaviors. And I brought this up, but what is a safety behavior? Now, safety behavior is anything you do that is a response to your anxiety about not doing things perfectly, making mistakes, being anxious, wanting to get that instant temporary relief, right? So lots of people with perfectionism or imposter syndrome might check or recheck and check again to make
Mm.
sure they've done something correctly.
Yeah.
Or maybe they seek a ton of reassurance from the people around them. Did I do this right? How does this look? What do you
Mm.
think of this? Right? Or they fix things over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But probably the biggest one is procrastination. I'm not going to work on this until I feel like it's
Mm.
just right. We call those not just right feelings, or this doesn't feel just right. So you keep working on it, or you push it off. Or if you don't feel like you can do something well, you don't start it at all. I've
Mm.
seen people turn down promotions and other things because they're worried about not being like being an imposter or not being able to perform the way that they want to.
Wow.
So these safety behaviors provide temporary relief. It gives you that instant relief, but the problem is it's only temporary. As anxiety grows and you start to learn these strategies, you learn that they're more and more, they become stronger and stronger. So the next time you're presented with a similar situation, you're going to engage in the same safety behavior again more strongly, more quickly
Ooh.
than you did before. So what it does is it just grows like a tumor over time,
Mhm.
and you end up ultimately imprisoning yourself in safety behaviors. Now you can see how this looks a lot like OCD and that there's a
Yeah.
lot of overlap because people are engaging in a ton of compulsive safety behaviors around whatever it is they're anxious about simply to try to gain control. But ultimately, they imprison themselves and they end up restricting their life.
Wow. That's crazy. Wow. How does overthinking play into all of this? Because to me, it sounds like a lot of, the overthinking because it's the go back, redo, the go back, redo. Because I'm a, I used to kind of be like that where I was, oh, it's got to be at least perfect to put it out there. And then I would go back and redo it a couple of times. And then finally I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna throw it out there and whatever happens, happens. So I think that plays a little bit, but I'm not sure like what you found.
Yeah, overanalysis, process paralysis, um, is all part of perfectionism. I talk about this in my book, Flawed, which is the book where I tackle this and that I was referring to earlier. It's, by the way, designed for leaders and management and employers, but it really has been used by people, so I've heard, um, for their own personal development and evolution as well. So they find it
Awesome.
helpful. And so, it's very common. I have a framework in the book that I talk about to tackle process paralysis and overthinking, which is all sort of a safety behavior, procrastination, overanalyzing, needing to know every angle, and needing to know the perfect process or the order of operations in order to move forward.
Hmm.
And I call it the emphasis framework, and it's based on how much effort you put into tasks. I have emphasis A, emphasis B, and emphasis C. Emphasis A is to give it 110%, everything you got. This is it. This is really where all your energy goes. Emphasis B is the get or done strategy. Just get it done. Doesn't need to be beautiful, doesn't need to be perfect, but needs to get done. Then there's emphasis C, which is not to do it at all. And there's a time and place for all three of these. I'm actually agnostic to judgment on these three things because there's a time and place for all three of them, right? If and what do you use to determine what deserves what level of emphasis? Well, it's your values. It's what's important to you in the context of your responsibilities, your family, your work, and what you find valuable. So there are certain things in life that warrant emphasis A. If you're planning, let's say you really find your wedding and valuable. So you might put all your time and energy into planning your wedding, or maybe you're trying to get into law school. So you're practicing like crazy to take the entrance exam. This is potentially all worth emphasis A if you value those things.
Hmm.
Emphasis C has plenty of space in our world and is totally justifiable. There are lots of things I choose not to do on
Hmm.
purpose, strategically. I choose not to open my junk mail. I choose not to answer the customer service satisfaction survey at the end of my call, right? I just
Yeah.
don't value that enough to put my time into it. And so I've
Hmm.
strategically chosen not to do those things, and I do not feel guilty about it.
That's awesome though, because a lot of people
They
are
do.
they feel obligated almost sometimes.
Right. Of course. And that's, I think the problem is that they feel like they've got to do everything. And so in reality, most of our time and energy is limited, and we can only emphasis B things or emphasis C things, right?
Hmm.
And we need to be very strategic about where we allocate our time and energy. Most things in life warrant emphasis B. I got to be honest with you. Very few things, you just can't, there's just not enough energy for other things.
Yeah.
I'll throw an arbitrary number out there, but it's like, 80% of the time, emphasis B is the way to go. Just got to get things done. You can't ignore it because it's got to get done, but it's not that important to you, so you can't give it an emphasis A. Right?
Do you think if people spend more time in emphasis B, are they actually moving closer to their goals, or is
Yeah.
it kind of a um slow, steady run towards the goals? Because I think a lot of people try to put emphasis A so that they're like marathoning it as fast as they can to their goals, but they don't realize that like that's gonna lead to like burnout and just like it ain't happening sort of thing, right?
That's an excellent segue because I was going to say the perfectionism pattern that we see is that people try to emphasis A everything, and what happens is it's impossible, and so things get pushed into emphasis C.
Oh, wow.
And in essence, your perfectionism and anxiety is choosing your emphasis C and not your values. And so things
Wow.
that are really important to you end up not getting done. And so things get procrastinated or they turn into sloppy messes. Things that you
Mm.
want to emphasis A turn into, really poor emphasis B or emphasis C altogether. And so absolutely. And that's the irony of perfectionism. I call it the
Wow.
perfectionism problem or the irony problem because people want to perfect things and they'll put all their energy into something, but then it never gets done.
Wow.
One of the stories I had from when I was a kid, and this, is an example of that irony, is I was trying to work on a picture of Spider-Man, drawing a picture of Spider-Man. And as I was drawing this thing, I was trying to get the webbing on the uniform just right. And there's a certain geometry to it if you can picture Spider-Man. And I was getting very frustrated with this, and I kept trying to get it perfect. It didn't feel right. And so I kept erasing it to the point where I was destroying the paper and the drawing.
Oh, wow.
And ultimately, not only did my Spider-Man not look perfect, it looked awful. And had I just stuck with the original
It would have been fun.
attempt, it would have been
Oh.
fine. And so that's the irony of perfectionism.
How much of the world would you say it would have been fine? Like if we all would have just stuck with the original, it would have been fine. Like how much do you think is missed opportunity there?
Almost always. But the problem is there's going to be those moments where you should have, quote unquote, should have given something more. And so those are
Mm.
extremely powerfully reinforcing moments, right? Because it's like, I knew it. This is why I should always emphasis say everything.
Right.
right? And the problem is that you still can't, and you can never quite predict what's going to end up being a failure or not good
Sure.
enough, right? And
Hmm.
so that is the risk of doing things emphasis B when you think they ought to be emphasis A, or even emphasis Cing things that you think ought to be emphasis B or A. Is this idea that you're running a risk, you're taking a risk. And so what do we call that in my field? We call that exposure therapy,
Mm.
right? And so you're basically doing things that you think you ought to be doing better or stronger or putting more time into, and we're asking you not to, and sitting with the potential risk that wasn't enough.
Wow. That's
But
crazy.
still using your values to pick and choose wisely what
Sure.
you're doing that for, right?
Yeah.
Right? If you're giving CPR to somebody who's like, you know, who's been in cardiac arrest in a restaurant, you're like, I think I'm going to emphasis see this, even though you're a doctor or an EMT, you're probably, that's not necessarily, uh, not necessarily the appropriate approach. So it really depends on the situation.
Yeah. So that's a good analogy because I think a lot of people think that like, yeah, I'm giving emphasis A at the CPR level, right? And really it's like emphasis C, and then they're kind of wondering, well, why isn't this working? As they go on, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to people who are listening that are like, that's me. I'm a total perfectionist, but like, how do I stop doing all of this?
Yeah. So again, it's not about changing you at your core. There are a lot of good things that come with people with perfectionism. Like we said, conscientiousness, honesty, loyalty, hard work, that kind of stuff. So it's about managing the stuff that's getting in the way. It's about the stuff that's causing you distress or distress to the people around you or is causing functioning problems, right? And so I would identify the areas in which it's causing the most problems. I would start to work on things that are going to improve your cognitive flexibility. And that emphasis framework is one way of doing that. How can you identify things that truly warrant, based on your values, emphasis A, and then selecting emphasis B, or sometimes even emphasis C for everything else?
Mm,
Can you do that over an extended period of time and learn how to triage, so to speak, prioritize those things based on your values? And then backing up, if you don't even know what your values are, that's even the better place to start, right?
sure.
I can't even tell you how many people I go into organizations and work with organizations or work with people or clients in my office, and they couldn't even tell me their values if I, pressed them. They don't know what they are, and so we have to work on that.
Mm,
Maybe they'll live for other people's values. They won't even understand that that's not necessarily their own, right?
wow. That is crazy.
Yeah, and so the first step is really to understand that. What are your values? And then from there, using those as a compass for moving forward with what you need to prioritize and learning how to sit with the anxiety and the potential risk of not putting emphasis A into everything.
Hmm.
That's a great place to start. If you can do that, I think you can make some tremendous gains right out the gate.
That's awesome. How do you help people go through that kind of anxious feeling when they're trying these new things, right? They're like, okay, well, I'm gonna try this and this is totally out of my comfort zone. I'm gonna go and emphasize A on this one thing. And they all that emotional stuff comes up no matter how hard you try. Like, how do you help somebody manage that?
Yeah, so let's say someone is typically used to doing something emphasis A, but they've chosen as in collaboration with me or with a therapist or with a coach or whatever, let's emphasis be this as a sort of exercise and see how that goes. What you're going to do is you're going to work with them on first accepting and acknowledging that they're going to have so many strong urges to want to emphasis A, that task, that
Mm,
they're going to want to kill it. They're going to want to go and do everything they can. And that's going to feel incredibly unnatural for them to just get it done and not
yeah.
not put any extra effort in, not do that extra check, not get that reassurance, not seek feedback, not fix things, right?
Hmm.
And have them sit with that and acknowledge that fear and anxiety of that and that potential risk is very real, and very much encouraging them not to engage in those safety behaviors and to continue trying this and knowing that doing it over and over again gives them opportunities to get used to that sensation and that experience,
Mm,
not to try to run from the fear, and that it's okay. that fear's not going to kill you. It definitely sucks, but it's not going to kill you.
Yeah.
And it's possible that you'll learn a thing or two from these exercises. The other thing that'll do is I'll even just have people make mistakes on purpose. This is something that's very uncomfortable for people, and it's part of the paradigm of exposure therapy. But basically what we do is I'll have people go in and with their, obviously I wouldn't force people to do this, but if, with their consent, have them come up with a list of things that they could do to make mistakes on purpose. And so maybe it's something like, this is not huge things like leave a
Yeah.
sponge in a patient as a surgeon, but like like maybe you misspell a person's name in a typo, or you forget punctuation, or you send this to Jim in receivables instead of Jim in accounting, right? Or the thing that I never do, which is to forget the attachment on an email,
Yes.
right? And
Same.
so you basically just create this hierarchy, so to speak, of different harder and harder things to do, and you
Mm,
teach them to build up a callus around making
yeah.
mistakes.
So I like how you're saying this is a gradual process, even out of this hole, we'll call it for a minute. How do people get into the hole? How do you get into perfectionism? Like, is it something, I mean, you had mentioned earlier, it's not something that you just arrive at or born with or have. Like, how do you?
Yeah, that's a question that we don't have a perfect answer for, pun intended. It's really, there's definitely a genetic component. We see this running in sort of a genetic fashion. There's also a family element and a learning element. This is like anything in this world. It's not as black or white as genes or environment, and it's a combination of both. Uh, Definitely a genetic component, but there's not like a gene for perfectionism. I think what we're seeing is that there's a genetic element for neuroticism and anxiety that tends to get hijacked by perfectionistic tendencies and
Wow.
really becomes the fuel for perfectionism. And so there's that anxiety element and that neuroticism that I think is biological. And then the society and development and learning and seeing things in families and modeling, all of this stuff, I think just shapes that perfectionism and creates a situation where it's leveraging that neuroticism to create this perfectionistic worldview and behavior. We see it in schools. It's not just parents. We see it in society. There's what we call socially prescribed perfectionism, which is
Oh,
where
really?
the world around us is pushing perfectionistic expectations on us. Things like magazine covers for female body image or
Hmm.
testing and scholarship in schools, families putting pressure on kids to act and behave a certain way. I mean, so it's everywhere we look, we're getting this pressure, and that sort of embeds expectations within our minds. And then there's, of course, self-oriented perfectionism, where you've created your own standards, not necessarily from the world around us, but you've sort of created your own standards in your mind about what's expected. This is what we see a lot of times in, a kid or somebody comes sees me and their parents have zero expectations of them, yet they have these rigid, intense expectations, and that comes from them. Maybe with some socially prescribed elements, but a lot of it comes from them.
Mm,
And I think the most toxic kind of force in perfectionism is other-oriented perfectionism. This is where you're projecting your expectations, perfectionist expectations onto other people. And so you're
hmm.
expecting other people to perform a certain way. And this gets really toxic for people, especially when it takes a moral element. So
Hmm.
we see this a lot in perfectionism where people hold others to moral standards that are perfectionistic and excessive. You show up at 7:01 when you're supposed to be here at 7, and then you get policed by the people around you. That is a moral level of other-oriented perfectionism, and it destroys relationships because no
Yeah.
one wants to be policed like that, and it comes across as very self-righteous.
Hmm.
And so we see perfectionism annihilate relationships in workplaces or in families or marital relationships. It is
Mm.
absolutely devastating. And in fact, if there's an area of impairment that gets ignored in the world of perfectionism, I think this is it.
No kidding. Wow. I was going to ask if there were different types, so I love that you just went through those different types. Are there even different levels? I mean, in your perfectionism quiz, you talk about low, medium, and high. are there different levels of those in the types that you were talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a dimension. So, you know, I know that we talk about being perfectionistic or not, but people fall on a continuum from none to exceptionally high, almost paralyzingly so. And so where do you fall? And you're welcome to check out um, the quiz that you took.
Yes.
It's at I think it's my website forward
Yep.
slash embers. It's www.gregchasson.com forward slash embers. And it'll take you to the quiz free, get some feedback. The only thing you got to do is type in your email address and you'll get your results. I think
I
it's that.
highly recommend it too, because like I said, I was very surprised. And the reason I was surprised is because I thought I was going to fall on the high end of the spectrum because of, being in the military and a veteran, we were always held to the standard of excellence. So I have noticed in my latter years that I really hold on to that. I want things to be dressed. I want things to be neat and in place. And so yes, I have kind of pushed that off onto my family a little bit there. But what I'm understanding is that I do have very high cognitive flexibility, where they teach you that if something goes wrong, you have to adapt and overcome it in a different way. And so I think that's why I scored low now after talking to you, because before I was like, I don't get it. This doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Well, if you've been working on it and you're recovering, the bottom line is that you've seen that shift. And what that tells me is that my quiz is probably pretty sensitive to people who are recovering and who,
Hmm.
so I feel good about that because I've seen a lot of people score in the appropriate direction on that quiz, meaning I'm feeling pretty good about its validity. And if you're scoring lower on it, that means you put in some good work and you're probably showing some sensitivity. The quiz probably is detecting that change, which is really encouraging for me. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. And the military, by the way, just you brought that up. I think the military is an interesting example of socially prescribed perfectionism.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to stay away from judgment, but the culture and environment that the military puts forth purposefully,
Hmm.
very much so, is one of, rigidity and doing things perfectly. And those expectations are sort of burned into your minds from the
Yes.
outset. In
Hmm.
fact, people go to the military in a career because they crave that level of
Hmm.
structure and rigidity. And so I have no concerns about it, although it can have a lasting long-term impact on people's mentality that can get them into trouble, especially when they're done in the
Yes.
from the military or retired or whatnot. Um, and so I do think that the military is a great example of how the environment around you can take someone who's almost the opposite of perfectionistic. And this just shows you the power of nurture.
Hmm.
You might not even have those tendencies. And all of a sudden you're put in a place like that, and you might walk away from there with a long-term tendency that needs to be worked on because it gets you into trouble.
Hmm. Well, and I also think it's also different types of environment because every veteran has a different experience wherever they go, and it can be even as forward as boot camp. Like everybody has a different experience of boot camp versus their job school versus even the position that they get into. And the higher levels of security that you get into as far as those jobs, like when you're going for, CIA and things like that, your level of awareness and your perfectionism, or the word I'm looking for is the required excellence that is needed for that,
Right.
is a lot higher.
It is. The expectations might even be excessive.
Yeah.
But I believe a lot of those institutions, they may be excessive, but they will have some flexibility around them. Not always.
Hmm.
And often it's the individual that applies the rigidity to it rather than, the
Interesting.
individual. Though there are definitely organizations and institutions that promote rigidity and excellence. And I think that that feeds the problem rather than helps it. I wanted to make a correction. The URL, the
Oh,
website,
sure.
I gave the wrong link. It's my website, but instead of Embers, it's Ember, Ember. So gregchasson.com /Ember, Greg Chasson, Greg. CHASS as in Sam, ON as in Nancy.com. And you can find out where you score, low, medium, or high. It also then comes with some resources for helping you, you know, to learn more about it and figure out if there's something you need to do about it, or gives you direction for people in your life who you think might struggle.
So you talked about your book, Flawed. Tell me the premises behind that a little bit more and where people can find your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Flawed is the name of the book. It's Flawed: Why Perfectionism is a Challenge for Management. You can learn more and find links at www.flawedbook.com, flawedbook.com, which is a fun URL. And if you can get it at any, pretty much wherever books are sold. There's a digital version, an ebook, there's a printed book, and then there's even an audiobook. So if you're one of the folks like me who likes to listen to things on the way to work, you can do that as well. Um, and yeah, the book is filled with the first part is all about learning about perfectionism and applying it to the world, the workforce, and teams and leaders. But I think that's where a lot of people glean their from their own experience. And then the second part of the book, which is the meatier part, is identifying particular, like specific areas that people struggle with, like um, and diving into strategy. So emphasis
Mm.
framework and process paralysis and making mistakes on purpose and cognitive rigidity. And then there's a chapter on something we could talk about as well, which is confusing principles and rules and values, which I think happens a lot in perfectionism. And then there's a section on moral perfectionistic tendencies and projecting that onto others. And by demand, I also have a chapter at the very end on how to deal with perfectionistic bosses.
Ooh.
Yes.
Oh, I bet you that's good.
Yeah. So if you're struggling with this because your boss is being perfectionistic,
hmm
that chapter is something you could actually get for free on my website as well as you can get that book or that chapter.
Well, I'm gonna have to go check that out because I've definitely uh dealt with that. It's a lot of
Yeah.
pressure. But I also don't want to be that type of boss. So,
Yep.
kind
Exactly.
of some self-conviction in there too to make sure like with that excellence factor in there, you just want to make sure that it kind of stays smaller in that. Well, that's really cool. Like you've given a lot to think about with this and I love the work that you're doing and how you're sharing. How do you normally share your message with everybody? Just teaching right now?
So, in terms of working in the clinical setting, we have a ton of perfectionism here. I'm at the University of Chicago. I run the clinic for the obsessive compulsive disorders program, including perfectionism. And at the University of Chicago, I have perfectionism coming out of my ears. It's everywhere because of the faculty, the staff come to get treatment here and their kids and families. And perfectionism is a very common thing we see here at an institution like the University of Chicago. So we have plenty of time to refine our thinking on perfectionism and provide strategies that help here. But I've also realized that perfectionism is not just for the therapy room, it's also just something we see out in the world. And in fact, my book was purposely written for a workplace setting because I think it has a huge impact on organizations. And I wanted to really kind of focus attention on one area. And so I've been getting into organizations and talking to them about how perfectionism might be getting in the way of productivity, definitely gets in the way of innovation, leads to turnover, high costs associated with hiring, leads to tremendous amounts of dissatisfaction in the workplace, and it's kind of working with organizations to help them. And I do that through, one-to-one sort of consultation, but also doing a lot of speaking and workshops to help people and within organizations learn about perfectionism and identify strategies for overcoming it.
I think it's great that you see it as a two-way street. It can be a projecting or it can be a self-accountability thing too, because I think a lot of people just think it's the self-accountability part. And I think that's where we miss that mark. So that's a little
Absolutely.
interesting that you
Yeah,
mentioned.
I actually think that projecting it on other people causes more damage than anything else.
Oh, 100%.
Because of the sort of people feel like it's so self-righteous and people don't want I've seen a single perfectionistic employee be so self-righteous about their worldview and perspective and so much policing and that they've absolutely like a cancer destroyed
Mm,
a team or in an organization to the point of being completely annihilated, all because of one person.
wow.
Just very toxic. And
Yeah.
so, how do you handle that? Both, if you're the individual, are you that person, or
Yeah.
are you working within a team that has that kind of person, and how do you deal with that?
Well, and then you add that plus other toxic traits that happen within the workplace. I mean, you're sometimes can be in a concoction of just it's going to blow up soon. And
Absolutely.
that's why you have good people that leave good companies because of traits of other people that maybe they're not even willing to recognize. What are some of the ways that people can recognize it? I mean, obviously, I want you to go, please go to the website. I'll put it down in the description, to drchasson.com/ember and take the perfectionism quiz. I really highly recommend it. But what are some other ways that people can maybe start to realize, like, oh, I do have some perfectionism tendencies, so that they'll maybe be more inclined to go take the quiz?
Yeah, thank you. I think looking for any sort of safety behavior that you're doing excessively is a good place to start. Am I avoiding a lot? Am I procrastinating a ton? And is that procrastination based on anxiety about not doing things correctly, not getting started because you don't know the perfect way or don't think you can do it perfectly? Do you find yourself being dismissive of people giving you compliments, right?
Hmm,
Because of that imposter syndrome and not thinking you
yeah.
deserve it, not thinking that your performance is warranted. Do you have a hard time recognizing when you do well on something but even if it wasn't perfect, like are you upset about an A minus instead of an A, right?
Hmm,
And do you find that you are putting 300% into something that other people are putting 100% into, or even, and it's not based necessarily on values and it's not that critical, right? These are the kinds of things. Like, are you having a hard time prioritizing based on what's important and feeling like you need to do perfectly on everything?
yeah.
These are all really big indicators. Are you getting feedback that you're being self-righteous or that you're policing people or people are avoiding you because they don't want to show you things that they're doing because they don't want your judgment? It's probably an indication that you might be being perfectionistic with other people. Are you confusing principles and rules? I didn't talk much about this, but it's very common for people with perfectionism to conflate those two things. Whereas principles are broad and abstract and can't be met, right? It's something like show up to obligations on time. That's a principle. The value underlying that is punctuality, right?
Hmm,
The rule that sits on top of the principle, which sits on top of the value in a pyramid kind of a scheme figure, the rule is, specific to the situation, but it's like be at work at 7 a.m. That's the rule. The principle underlying it is show up to obligations on time. And the value underlying that is punctuality.
hmm,
People confuse these, not just with perfectionism, but in general, but perfectionists in particular. And so they might start treating principles like rules where they are holding people account to doing things to meeting principles constantly, even though you can't meet a principle. You can't meet the principle of showing up to obligations on time. You can just show fidelity towards it, right? Most
yeah.
of the time I show up to obligations on time. Not every time, but most of the time, right? Whereas with a rule, you can meet it or not meet it. Did you show up to work at 7 a.m. today? Yes or no?
Hmm,
And
wow.
the value underlying all of this is also abstract and not meetable. You can't meet the value of being punctual. You can just show fidelity towards it, right?
Yeah.
And so people with perfectionism get stuck on policing and getting stuck on abiding by principles and values as if they're rules. So if they don't meet it, which is impossible every time, they feel like they've failed, right? They've failed being a punctual person, for example.
Yeah.
And that's just not possible. You can't meet those anyway.
Yeah.
Just the amount of distress and depression or anxiety that causes, or if you hold other people to those standards, the amount of toxicity that causes is really brutal. And so I use a really stupid example if people are struggling to understand the confusion of principles, rules, and values. I use a really stupid example because I think it highlights highlights the differences. So let's say you're at the community pool, right? And you're there and you see another kid drowning, not your own kids, but your own different kids drowning, and you look over and their parents are on their cell phones, they're not paying attention. Lifeguards are flirting with each other, they're not paying attention, right? And you're like, and you start running towards the kid to save him, and you stop right at the lip of the pool, and you say, well, oh well, I ate within 30 minutes,
Mm,
right? So it says on the rules, you can't go in the pool within 30 minutes of eating, so the kid dies. I know
right.
it's really stupid. Nobody would do that. But the
No.
bottom line is if you are rigidly adhering to rules, sometimes it doesn't make sense and it can be very problematic. And sometimes it even undermines the point of the rule in the first place. What's the point of the rule? Don't go in the pool within 30 minutes. Well, it's probably because they don't, it's safety, it's public safety. That's the value, right?
Yeah.
The idea is that you might get cramps, you might drown, you might throw up and cause other people to throw up. Like it could be a pretty gross scene, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a public safety. That's the value. Well, you just let a kid drown. How is that aligned with public,
Right. Exactly.
right? And so sometimes adhering to a rule can be so rigid for people with perfectionism that it undermines the actual value on and principle on which that rule is based.
Hmm. I think that's a great example because it really does highlight each one of them individually and really makes you think like, is this really something I should be focused on? I think even too, when you start to focus on those things, you can become even domineering to people. And
Yeah,
people don't take lightly to that because they don't want to be controlled. Even though your heart might be in the right place, you might not be meaning to be domineering. It still happens.
I agree. I think people don't want to be told what to do, and especially if it's something around a rule, even and especially if it undermines or is if it's completely contradictory to the principles that underlie that rule, right? We know people like this. Maybe you are one of them where they sort of live their life according to rules. And I'm not saying rules are bad. I think rules are crucial, but they're not the end all be all. So sometimes rules are changed, and sometimes rules don't reflect reality. And sometimes the principles underlying the rules are really what's important that you need to understand. I mean, there's a lot of analogies to this stuff in the real world. Like lawyers will tell you, attorneys will tell you that two major arguments that go into a court battle, sometimes it's about the spirit of the law and sometimes it's about the letter of the law. That's the same idea,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Or you have things where you have, you know, I think that's probably the best example, but really
Yeah.
the idea is that you can be rigid about the wording and the lettering of the law, the letter of the law, or you can understand the point that it was trying to convey because language is imperfect.
How do you help the people that you teach and talk to and work with in your office understanding like the letting go of that? Because that's got to be something that's super hard.
It is super hard. The first step is to help them recognize when it's happening because I see it everywhere. The pool example is silly, but that pattern is everywhere, especially in workplaces and families and you name it. And so people need to first identify it. And one of the easiest ways is to identify the word should. I
Oh,
should do this. I should do that. You should do this. You should do that.
hmm.
Should is the most toxic word in the English language.
I never thought of it that way, but now that you say that, yeah, I totally, after this whole conversation, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's setting a universal, excessive, and rigid standard, and it tends to treat a principle or value as this sort of meetable rule. Like you should go to the gym every day.
Mm.
Really?
Yeah.
Says who?
All right.
Right? Yeah, says the biggest loser. I don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that should statements are a good clue that something's unhealthy in your thinking, and should statements are really brutal when it's being projected outward, right? You should
Hmm.
do this.
Yes.
Should I? Thank you for that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
In fact, should has been identified as such a toxic word that there's plenty of jokes in the psychology community around this, to make light of the fact that this is such a toxic word.
Wow.
famous psychologist who sort of revolutionized the way we approach patients, named Albert Ellis, once said about should statements that we should stop masturbating, M-U-S-T, because must is a variant of should, and he was using that as sort of a way of getting people to understand that this is a problem. Clayton Barbeau, who's a psychologist, said you should stop shoulding all over yourself, right? It's
Yeah.
this idea that should is such a powerful word that it can control you and the people around you and creates tremendous cost to your relationships.
Mm.
So should, must, ought to, these kinds of phrases are a good clue that maybe something's not healthy in your approach.
What if you're trying to get somebody to try something new? Like you're in a conversation with a friend and you're just be like, hey, you should try, X, Y, and Z, like whatever that looks like. Is that even a way of us projecting?
You should try something new is a way of projecting onto other people.
Mm. Yeah, like
Um,
if I said to you, like, well, this person has really good ideas and things like that that I want you to learn, so you should try reading their book.
well, you should definitely try reading my book.
We will.
That should
Right?
statement is okay. I would go with that should statement.
Love it. I love it.
No, even in that case, I would say shoulds are, I would stay away from them in general. Approach my book if this is an interesting topic and it's something you value learning more about and something you value changing. Or you should stay away from it if that's not something you're interested in, right? Should statements in my mind are unnecessary. Like go with someone's values and what they truly believe and allow them to sort of make that determination rather than sort of dictating to others what they quote unquote should and shouldn't do. Now, we all use that word. It's easy to slip into that. It's a quick and easy shortcut for telling people your opinions on things, but just be mindful that that word comes loaded and often is overused and rigidly adhered to by people with perfectionism.
I think I'm gonna make that something that I try for like I'm gonna try it for a week and then maybe build up to 30 days of not using the word should.
Very
Just
difficult.
something to
I
try
love
it
it.
out to see what happens with that.
Try it with yourself first and see how that
Yes.
goes.
Yeah.
And then if you're noticing it with other people, see how that goes.
Yeah.
There are other ways of approaching people other than should,
Can you give
right?
me a couple examples so I have some?
Start with where you're coming from, right? You can talk about this with people. If you're trying to get people to, if they should not use should, and you're trying to tell people that they shouldn't use should, it's a fun example, right? You can be like, look, without even saying that, you can say, the perfectionism podcast taught me about the word should and its power and its problems. I'm going to take a month to try to identify when I'm using it and how it's getting in the way. And it
Hmm.
might be something that would be helpful for you to consider, right?
That's such a more, even the way that you just said that, and I know you said it on the fly, so I mean, great job on that. But even the way that you said it on the fly sounded more connectability, like you connect with the person more, and you also came across even more genuine, even though there was something that you just, came off the fly there. So like that was very powerful right there for that.
Yeah, and it came very close to a should statement without it actually being a should statement. I mean,
Yes.
the subtext is a should statement, but in a way that was, I think, going to result in them responding better than a should statement. And it gives them the wiggle room and flexibility to be like, oh, yeah, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed it, but not me. Right?
Right. I feel that even the way you said it though, they might even be more inclined to try it because you're not giving them a command per se, really.
Yeah. People don't like commands. And
Hmm.
in general, it's just straight from the book of assertiveness. It's just something that I train people on all the time. Make it about you. And it's not like I think you should do this. That's not what I mean.
Right.
That's cheating. It's more like I'm coming from this perspective and this is my experience and sort of letting them know that this is something that could benefit them. And so instead of saying you don't fold the towels right, right? Instead you say, I, you know, I love it when the towels are symmetrical and it's something that's very important to me.
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, it's totally different than you should fold them this way because really what you're saying is I do it this way, so you should too, and follow my standard per se.
100%. And I have a little discussion in the book about folding towels that people find fun.
Do
So,
you really? Oh, I love
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I seriously think I'm gonna title this podcast "Let Go of the Should."
Let go of the should. Yeah.
Hmm.
There you go. And fold towels the correct way.
Yeah, right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And this was an awesome conversation. I hope that the listeners definitely got something out of it. Make sure to check out the links to go take your perfectionism quiz, find his book, and even find his research and things online. There's lots of information, and it really had me going down some rabbit holes. So I know you will too.
Yeah.
But thank you all so much for
Because
tuning in today.
if people are really interested, the book is a great intro, but I actually offer a course where you can get a free
Oh,
module
yes.
as well. And so you can go test it out, test drive it, and see if you like it. And the course really dives into a ton of this and more and gives you practical strategies and resources and really is a place. It's not therapy. I have to make that, disclaimer, but it certainly provides a much deeper experience and training and learning, experiential exercises, case examples than the book offers. So it is something to consider as well. And that can be found on my website as well,
That's awesome.
gregchasson.com.
Yes. So, are there any questions that I should have asked you that I didn't?
No, you are perfect.
Oh, thank you. Oh, well, great. Well, we're going to wrap this one up today. We've gone a little longer than usual, but like I said, when the conversation flows, you got to tune in and keep up with it. But we just appreciate your time, Dr. Chasson, for joining us. And thank you for joining in, listeners. And we hope that now you can ignite your life and go out and set the world on fire.
Thank you so much.